doing tonight? Awesome. Oh, look, everyone responded. That's fantastic. I'm super happy to be here for this knowledge talk, and I'm really, really glad to see all of you out here today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Cafe Imports, and for those of you who have never heard of me, which is probably 95% of the people in the audience, yes, I am the editorial manager for Cafe Imports. We are an importing company based primarily out of the United States, but we have an office here in Melbourne. We have offices, a sales office in Berlin that services the European market, and then we also have some offices for our green coffee buyers in Costa Rica, Ethiopia, and El Salvador. We focus primarily on specialty coffee. We do 99%, specialty coffee, and then some direct trade commercial coffee for a couple of very special clients. But for the most part, we are an importer of fine specialty coffee. So we source coffees around the world and then bring them into our various markets and then sell them to roasters like Toby's or like other roasters around the world. And my job, so editorial manager is kind of a made-up title. Like so many titles in specialty coffee, it's kind of a title that's a catch-all for a lot of the different things that I do. But what I basically do at Cafe Imports is I'm our primary storyteller. I write every word that appears on any kind of Cafe Imports product. So our website has a lot of content on it, a lot of information about coffees and about the business that we do and about the work that we do and about general coffee information. And a lot of those words are mine. Every harvest report that we put out, every email marketing blast that we put out, every Instagram caption that we put out, all of the copy on all of our blogs, and also all of the individual profiles for every coffee that we sell. Those are all my words. It's not me alone. Of course, nobody works in a vacuum in this industry. My job is really to interview the people that work with me and to interview our partners and to take their stories and to translate them into something that's usable to our customers and then also something that's usable to the consumers, because most of the roasters who buy from us also use that marketing material in their own marketing material and then share that with the consumers on the other end. So I like to consider myself kind of the storyteller of Cafe Imports, which it makes sense because it fits in with my training, which is as a journalist. I went to journalism school and I actually worked in newspapers and magazines before I really got into writing about coffee in particular. I was a horror movie reviewer for a long time, which is kind of the same thing as working in coffee. I watched a lot of zombie films, baristas are really familiar with zombies. They're the first people to show up when the doors open in the morning. So I have a lot of experience with zombies on both sides of my training. But I also, I've written for mainstream and trade publications for my entire career in coffee, and I also wrote a book, which you can buy in the back, about the history of coffee in New York City, which came out a couple of years ago. So I have a lot of experience with doing interviews and writing newsy bits and writing profiles of things, and so my experience in coffee is kind of like a double life, so to speak, a little bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation. Also, you like how I wore my most Australian outfit for this? It was an accident. I didn't know I had that vest until I knew I was coming here. It smells really bad, that vest, actually. But so when Toby's approached me and they said, we want you to give a knowledge talk, a couple of things ran through my mind, which is the first thing was that I have imposter syndrome, and I thought, well, what do I have enough knowledge about that I'm gonna stand up there and talk about? But then I quickly realized that I wanna talk about the thing that I always wanna talk about, which is traceability. And the reason that I wanna talk about traceability is because when I really look at what my job is, that is what I work in every single day. The stories that I tell about the work that we do, the stories that I tell about the coffees that we buy, they all relate to our concept of traceability. And every day when I go to work, I ask myself questions about the work that I do in that field. And so rather than stand up here and give a lecture about what it is that I do and what traceability means to me, I also want us to have a conversation. So this will be a little bit different from, I think, a lot of the knowledge talks that y'all have experienced before, in that I'm going to ask a lot of questions. because my job as a journalist is to gain knowledge by asking questions of other people, and I believe that knowledge is something that's best exchanged rather than just, you don't need it dripping from my lips like little golden nuggets. I want us to learn together rather than me just feeding you what I already know. So I'm going to use this opportunity a little bit selfishly because I want you to give me as much knowledge as I'm able to give to you. So know that as I go through this presentation, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. They're not rhetorical questions. If you don't answer them, I'll just be standing up here awkwardly like, hey, good thing I put on this ruffly shirt. So do feel free to just shout out an answer. We also have a microphone that'll be wandering around. So if there's something that you want to say that's a little bit longer, there will be some parts of this that are actually a conversation, and that will help all of us, I think, walk away with more knowledge. Are we all on board with that? Does that sound okay? Yes. Awesome, great. I love a verbal consent. It's like when you're sitting in the exit row. Okay, so we are going to talk about coffee traceability. The first thing that I want to do as we get started up is to establish what the word traceability means. I mean, I think we all basically have an idea of what traceability is, but I want us to really sort of start to say what it is that we expect when we hear the term traceability and it's applied to coffee. What are some of the things that you expect when you know that a coffee has traceability? What are some of the pieces of information that you expect to see? Shout them out.
Origin.
Origin, like the country of origin? Okay.
Farm.
The farm. Anything else?
Processing.
The processing information. Species, like Arabica or Canephora. Okay.
And variety.
And variety. Anything else?
Every stop on the way.
What conditions? Oh, like the conditions that the coffee was grown under, the conditions of the workers and stuff? Excellent. Someone else over here said that every stop along the way. So the supply chain, the chain of custody for that coffee. Awesome. Anything else? Does the coffee's story, the story of how that farmer came to acquire the farm, or the story of the mill, its foundation, does that seem to be part of traceability as well?
Yes.
Okay, great. So some nods and a verbal yes. I love it. Great. Awesome. So this is basically what I do. Like 60% of what I do every day is take individual coffees that a company like us, Cafe Imports, that we sell, and I gather information from our green team, our green buyers, and from our export partners, and I create these things. These are available on our website. We call them beanologies, which is like a really cheesy word, to basically say that it's a profile that tells you information about the coffee itself. So you see on the top there, there's I can almost point at it. There's a P number, that means the product number. That means the individual lot of coffee that's available for sale. And then this is a particular coffee from a farmer named Arnolfo Leguizamo. The coffee comes from his farm called Finca Primavera, and it is a farm that's located in San Agustin in Huila, Colombia. Underneath that, you see that there's all this other data about this particular coffee. The variety that it is, it's a Caturra, the elevation of the farm, the average elevation of the farm, the processing method, and then a story about the farm itself and about how Cafe Imports met Arnolfo and a little bit about his history. There's a beautiful picture of him with his wife and son. This is what I basically do for a living, is compile this information and put it into a format and put it out there onto our website so that someone who buys this coffee has access to this information and they can use it in their own marketing materials, and they can also use this information to make purchasing decisions. Now, the more that I do this work, the more that I do the compiling and the sharing of this information, the more I come to ask myself questions about the information that we're sharing. How are we getting it? What are we asking for? How are we sharing it? So that's what I'm actually here to talk about today, is kind of the primary function of my job, is the traceability, the profiles of the individual coffees, and the ways that we have come to expect traceability for coffees and what they mean. So far, so good?
Yep.
Tight, awesome. So, God, isn't it great when the slide is like the most predictable, here's the definition of a word kind of a slide. It's like I took PowerPoint 101 before I came here. So the other thing that I want to point out as we kind of get started up on this conversation about traceability and specialty coffee is that traceability and specialty coffee arguably have never existed separate from one another. The term specialty coffee was actually coined in the 1970s by a woman named Erna Knudsen, who was working in a large commercial brokerage in the west coast of the United States. And what she was really interested in was developing a marketplace for coffees that were special based on the way that they tasted different from the large kind of bulk brand, broader kind of classifications of coffee. So she had this idea that you could buy a coffee that was just from Colombia, or you could buy a coffee that was specifically from Cauca or from a specific region within Cauca. And that coffee from Cauca tasted different from the coffee from Tolima, and that coffee from Nariño, and that coffee from Antioquia. And she thought that there was something special about the terroir of coffee that made individual microregions taste different from one another. So she coined the term specialty coffee as a way of identifying microregions. I mean, we would consider them still macro regions, I think, at this point, if we're just talking about departments in Colombia. But she was really identifying the individual characteristics of a place that made a coffee taste different from coffees from elsewhere. And that was the first time that people had really focused on those types of differentiations in order to identify coffees that were more valuable and more pleasurable or more connoisseur kind of products for us to enjoy on the marketplace. So obviously since the 1970s, since Erna Knudsen coined this term, she just passed away last year. Actually, you can read some really wonderful obituaries and remembrances of her. She was a Spitfire. But since the term was coined, we have become much more sophisticated as an industry. We've also, alongside with the development of different areas of the marketplace itself, we've also really experienced a boom in the ways that we communicate information, both the ways that we gather information about coffees and the way that we share it. In the 1970s, there was no such thing as Twitter. There was no such thing as these elaborate websites with all of this information. My job obviously did not exist at that time. And so these days, the ways that we gather and share traceability information is completely different from what Erna Knudsen had in mind. And that's also a little bit of what I want to talk about today. Now, when I talk about traceability in this particular conversation, I'm specifically mentioning it in reference to our marketing use, not necessarily in terms of the bookkeeping or in terms of the record keeping or financial transactions necessarily, but really primarily what we present about coffee to a more general public, just to kind of clarify. Still good? Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so I could literally talk about traceability all day, and if you ask any of my colleagues, I actually do, much to their chagrin most of the time. There are three things in particular that I want to bring to this audience today that I hope that we can converse about. We only have a little bit of time together, so I hope to get to all three, but we'll see how it goes. But the three things that I absolutely want to bring up while we're in this conversation are traceability and its relationship to quality, quality and its relationship to price, and then marketing and ethics. If we don't quite get to elaborate on everything because I get the hook and I get dragged off of stage for some reason, afterwards we should have some time to also chat, and I would love to have this conversation. I will literally talk about traceability in the middle of the night if you wake me up with a text message, like anytime. It's really annoying, but I'm absolutely down for this conversation anytime. So this is just the beginning, so to speak. Okay. So the first thing is traceability and quality. So we already established in the first set of questions that I asked the types of information that we expect when we see that a coffee has traceability. Its elevation, the farm name, the region, things like that, the variety. First of all, I want to ask a very broad question, which is, do you all in the audience naturally assume that if a coffee has traceability, it is of high quality? Yes, like generally speaking, a coffee that has traceability versus one that doesn't have traceability. You would assume that the coffee that has traceability is higher quality,
Higher,
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if I were to speculate, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but if I were to speculate, I would say that part of the reason for that is like, why go to the trouble if it's not good? Like, why tell exactly where it's from and what makes it taste a certain way if it doesn't taste good? We don't want to put lipstick on a pig, right? Like, generally that you would say that, like, that signals to you that there's something about that coffee that makes it special. So I also will ask, you as coffee professionals, or if there's anyone in the audience who's not a coffee professional, what about, like, what individual elements of what we already defined as traceability, the variety, the location, the processing, which of those things do you specifically look for when you're trying to identify if a coffee is going to be what you perceive to be high quality?
Variety and processing.
Variety, processing, origin, like the country, the region. Taste, like tasting notes, great. The scores. Do you ever look for elevation? Do you look for like farm elevation? Awesome, okay. Does the story imply something about quality to you? If you can read the story of a coffee on the bag, does that imply that the coffee's higher quality? I'm seeing some nods. Okay, cool, great. Are there things in your experience that you buy even though you don't know the traceability of it? Like, are there brands that you go to whose products you expect high quality from, even though you don't know anything about where those products come from? Like, does anyone here wear Nike shoes? And you go to Nike because you believe that Nike is a high quality brand, and you don't necessarily need to know about the origin of where those things are made. Do you think that you would pay more money if you knew where those things were made from? Or do you think you just basically trust a brand to give you a high quality product?
Depends.
Depends. Sure, like anything else, right? Like, it depends, totally. Cool. So one of the things that I think about a lot when I think about my relationship with traceability and the impression that I have about quality is when I'm going to buy wine. And wine is a relationship, it's a comparison that we make a lot in specialty coffee, at least in the United States. I don't know if it's similar here. I know that Australia has a really strong wine industry as well, so it might be different, it might be comparable. You can correct me. I'm totally welcome to have you disagree with me, by the way. But when I look at wine bottles and I think about the ways that we talk about coffee and coffee connoisseurship in the same kind of way that we talk about wine connoisseurship, I'm usually really astounded by how little information is actually presented on a wine label. When you go into a wine shop or a bottle shop, you'll often see what the country that the wine is from. Sometimes you'll see the micro-region that the wine is from, like what part of France maybe. Oftentimes you'll see a variety listed. Sometimes you'll see the percentage of the variety of grapes that are listed in that wine, and usually that's just about it. I know that sometimes there are tasting notes, like sometimes it'll tell you what the wine kind of tastes like, and sometimes it'll tell you what you should eat while you're drinking that wine. And in the United States, I don't know if it's true here, but in the United States, most of the label is taken up by a warning that tells you not to operate heavy machinery while you're drinking the wine. Which is probably the most significant information that we can have, but it doesn't tell you anything about how it tastes. One of the really interesting things to me about the way that wine is marketed is that you almost never see the name of the person who owns the winery. You almost never see a picture of the person who owns the winery. And you almost never see any information about the farm itself or the processing, right? You never see the elevation that those grapes are grown at. You almost never see any information about the maceration style, the wineskin contact time, the tank that the fermentation happens in, which actually has a huge impact on the flavor of the wine. If you're lucky, you will get some kind of information about maybe the story of that family or that processing manufacturing plant. But very little actual specific information. You certainly don't get serving suggestions, which we often see on coffee bags, right? Like a little Chemex icon or a little espresso icon or something about how to brew. No, you've never seen a bottle of wine that comes with instructions on how to open it and how to take the liquid into your mouth, aspirate it, draw it across your entire palate, make everyone else in the room uncomfortable, making as much noise as you possibly can. I think it's really interesting for us to think about the ways that we equate wine marketing and coffee marketing, and also to remember that part of the reason that we get the information that we get about wine as opposed to the information that we get about coffee is that the person who bottles the wine is also the person who usually owns the farm, who oversees the processing of that grape, who oversees the bottling of it and the quality control of it, and often who oversees the marketing of it. So the whole system is very much vertically integrated in a way that coffee is not. And it's not an accident, the amount of information that a winemaker shares about the wine and about themselves on the bottles. So far, so good?
Yep.
Does anyone use price, by the way, to indicate what kind of wine you want to buy? Does anyone go specifically for price? Because yeah, and the label, like how cute it is, like
yeah, how colorful it is.
Yeah, if it looks good on the table, absolutely. I mean, come on, we're all only human. So yeah, for me personally, I know that there are certain countries I can rely on. I know that there are certain couple of regions, a grape variety, and then I go for price. Like I have a minimum that I have decided that I will pay for wine because I'm worth it. You know, the days of really cheap wine are kind of over for me. No judgments if anyone's still drinking wine. I'll still share it if you want to share it, but I'm not going to buy cheap wine. So price is a big indicator for me as well. It's the piece of information that's going to make or break the decision. So here's an interesting thing too about coffee. All of the traceability information that we typically share is about the raw material. It's about what the producer has control over, what the producer did to the coffee, right? Where the farm is located, what variety the coffee is, what the producer did in order to process that bean. Very rarely do we see anything on our bags about the value that's added by the roaster. Almost never will you see the equipment that the coffee is roasted on. Almost never will you see the information about what the charge temp was or what the rate of rise was. Or if we get a roast degree, it's usually the broadest term, light, medium, or dark. Even though everyone in this room knows light means any number of things and medium means any number of things. And we want to know whether the farm is at 1,580 meters or 1,570 meters, but we don't want to share the information about what the Agtron score is of that coffee. The first question that I ask myself when I go into work every day is, why does traceability stop at the green coffee? Why is it that we don't share information about how we add value to that coffee in order to actually make it soluble and to actually make it consumable? Nobody can drink green coffee, so I mean, who cares what the elevation is, because I can't drink the coffee when it comes straight off the farm. So it is interesting to me to start thinking about the information that we share and what we're not willing to share about the work that we do, including the story of the experience of the roaster. How experienced is this roaster? How long have they been roasting coffee? What kind of a machine are you using? Things like that. I see a hand all the way up in the very back.
So if we can charge $350 a kilo for a geisha, does that go back to the actual person who cultivates the bean? That sort of price range? I find it interesting, that sort of thing. When you look at traceability as well, even with wine as well, a lot of wine merchants today, especially in Australia, don't actually convey on the bottle the actual methodology that they use or facilitate to produce that wine. That's a quick fix. It's all about a marketing tool because it's natural or has no sulfites or it has no egg whites. I guess what my question is does that margin that we express in Australia and around the world for that sort of level of coffee, does that go back to the cultivator itself? Because we buy it at a certain level, even if it might be a small allotment or a high altitude or whatever it may be, how does that transfer back?
That's a great question. For anyone who can't hear the question, it's about how much of the price, or how do we know that the price itself that we pay for these really fine coffees actually translates back to the producer? It's almost as though I had a plant in the back of the room who was keep going. Get to the point of what you're actually talking about. I will talk a little bit about that as well. How much of the price actually goes back to the producer and how do we know? And the idea is that the traceability information that we have, someone said it implies a story. It implies an ethics, right? It implies some kind of relationship that exists between the person who's buying the coffee and the person who's selling it. And it implies that there's some kind of transparency along the supply chain. That's great. We're going to come back to this. Save that in your mind, in your thoughts. But this, I would like us to start thinking about why it is that we stop sharing information at the green product and why we stop short of sharing information about what we do. And one of the things that someone said yesterday in Brisbane was, but if we put all of our information on the bag, then we're sharing proprietary information. We're sharing something about how we roast this coffee that someone else could then take and use for themselves. And I don't know if that's maybe something that's coming up for people in the audience, but if it is, maybe give me a nod. But like, we maybe don't share information because we're a little bit afraid of the competition. That's important. We're going to keep that in mind as we go. Okay. So quality and price. So we've already established a general idea that coffee that has higher traceability is usually higher quality. And then we as a community, I think, in specialty coffee usually say, what we want to do is pay the highest price for the highest quality coffees. We want to incentivize quality across the board so that the most expensive coffees in the world you usually think of as being super rarefied. This kind of goes back to the question in the back, like that geisha that you buy that tastes like jasmine, florals, like this incredibly delicate, beautiful aromatic coffee that's very limited quantities and very hard to grow. We pay more money for it because it represents a lot more work on the end of the farmer. It represents a lot more risk, right? For the most part, we often equate quality and price. Now, I want to ask you guys questions about the experiences that you've had with the traceable coffees that you've bought in your past. Have you ever found that you bought a coffee that had a lot of traceability, a lot of information about the farm and the farmer and the beans themselves and the variety, and you thought that that coffee tasted bad? You didn't think it was good quality coffee. Have you had that experience?
Yes.
How would you market that coffee if it was really high quality but it didn't have any traceability? Would it be harder to market? Yeah, because you didn't have a story. And because also, if something has really high quality and a really high price but no traceability, it's hard to know where that money's going, right? Okay. So my next question is, who in this audience likes coffees from Kenya?
Yeah.
Who buys coffees from Kenya?
Yeah.
Lots of people. So Kenya represents a really interesting contradiction, a really interesting point at which our ideas about traceability and quality don't quite meet up. And this is part of the question asking process that I have gone through, is what do we do with coffees that score really high but have almost no traceability? So for anyone who is in the audience who's not necessarily really involved in the coffee industry or not super attuned with what certain types of coffees are like, Kenyan coffees are like some of everybody's favorite. I think coffee professionals universally say that Kenyan coffees are their favorite. They tend to be really complex, really fruity and floral, really sweet, sometimes really tart, sometimes even a little bit savory in a way that's really interesting and not weird and seaweedy like you do sometimes experience. They are really dynamic. They're mouthfuls of coffee. At the same time, the Kenyan coffee market is among the most complex in the world. The chain of custody is really long, and the chain of custody legally requires that many, many hands touch coffee before it ends up in the end sack. The thing about Kenyan coffees is that they score the highest on the cupping tables. For us at Cafe Imports, absolutely, they're routinely above 90 points. They also are the most expensive, in part because the chain of custody is so long and every person along that chain needs to get paid. There's also an auction system that's built in because of the way that Kenyan coffee marketplace is actually established, and it has been that way since the 20s, where people go to an actual auction and bid on the coffee based on quality. The average Kenyan farmer owns between 1/5 and 1/8 of a hectare of land. And on that fifth to an eighth of a hectare of land. They grow coffee, tea, corn, beans, cassava plants. They grow things that they need in order to live. They grow things that they need in order to sell. They bring their coffee in cherry form to a washing station for the most part. There are exceptions to this. But for the most part, they bring their cherry to a washing station. There could be 100, 500, 2,000 producers that show up to that washing station with their cherry. The cherry gets weighed, it gets sorted. That person gets an amount of money for the amount of cherry that they brought in. The cherry gets divided into different tanks and it gets processed based on its quality, usually based on its visual quality or its like sorting quality on a float tank. That coffee gets divvied up, it gets processed in its way, it gets bagged up, and it gets shipped out. There's no way to know, there is almost no way to know, in the vast majority of Kenyan coffees in the world, whose coffee is in what bag. Which means when you hit a coffee that's a 95-point Kenyan, you cannot incentivize those producers. You cannot reward them for their quality. The marketplace is not set up for the money to go back to the producers to incentivize them, to tell them to do better, to allow them to invest in their farms, even to repeat what they've already done. Most of them have no idea if their coffee is the top of the line or the bottom of the line. Now, if we equate traceability and quality and price, how do we account for the fact that some of the most expensive and some of the best coffees in the world are almost not at all traceable down to the individual producers? And what does it mean to us that we still share information as though we have relationships with those producers? We still share elevation information. Usually it's the elevation of the washing station, by the way, the elevation of the factory. We share a general amount of the varieties that maybe people grow in Kenya. We share information about the processing that happens at the washing station. All of that information is designed in our marketing to convey something to a consumer, but very few of us actually have any real relationship with any of that information. I myself have never been to Kenya. I've never been to the Kenyan auction system. I've never been to an exporting office. My colleagues in the sensory analysis team at Cafe Imports, they will spend a couple of weeks in Kenya every year and they'll cup 1,500 coffees. They are just cupping coffees from samples that are presented from washing stations. Those washing stations represent thousands of farmers. Those farmers do not have names to us because they do not have names except at the washing station in the most general way for bookkeeping purposes. This is where I started to think about what traceability means. What does it signal to us? And how do we rely on it as a crutch in our marketing to convey a message about the business that we're doing and the specialness of that coffee? Again, when we rely on the green coffee as the most valuable part of the process, that also means that we have responsibility for where that value is going. We don't have much control as a general marketplace over where the value is going in Kenya. And Kenya is not an exception to the rule. Most of Africa actually operates that way. Your Rwandan coffees, Burundian coffees. Then we get into Indonesia. Indonesia is almost the same way. Very, very small holder farmers who are beholden to a washing station or a factory to do the processing and to do the purchasing. This is where I started to think, what does our relationship with traceability mean? And what does it mean for the information that we're sharing with our customers? Are we still good? Have I bummed anybody out? Does everybody have a drink? Do you need a drink for the rest of this conversation? To be fair, Kenyan coffees are exceptional. They're absolutely exceptional. There's absolutely no denying that. But why? And how do we know exactly if we don't know how to identify, how to drill down to the individual producers and what their conditions are? We use traceability as a way of saying that there's a taste of place, there's something that the producer is doing that makes that coffee taste special. But when we don't know who the producers are, how do we account for that? And how can we say that it's okay in one place and not in another? Another question that I would like to ask is the interesting thing for me, and it's not really even a question, I guess I'll just give an anecdote because I don't want to call anybody out, is that we will often sell coffees that are 90, 92 points from Colombia that are regional select coffees. They are blended lots from smallholder producers. And lots of people won't buy them because there isn't traceability attached to them. They don't know who the individual farmers are. We have a very different expectation of the amount of traceability that we say is acceptable in Central and South America. We have a very different relationship with that marketplace. The same coffees, the same equivalent quality score coffees from Colombia and Kenya will be purchased in very different ways based on the traceability alone. And I think that that's really important for us to think about. Why is traceability important in the way that it is? That brings me to my next question. So now we're getting into the section that keeps me up every night. This is the part that I have nightmares about, which is marketing and ethics. Literally what I do every day is assign traceability information to coffees in order to sell them. And I have thought a lot about the impact of the work that I do and the impact of the information that I'm asking from people and the information that I'm sharing to people. Because I feel like coffee is a great chain of responsibility. And everyone in this room is here not because you didn't have anything else to do tonight, but you're here because you're really interested in coffee and you want to do the right thing. We are in specialty coffee because we think that we are doing good. I think that in my own position, I have really assumed a lot of things about the way that the specialty coffee market works and what consumers really need in order to participate in that marketplace. And it wasn't until I started to do individual beanologies, God, I hate that word, I can't wait until we retire it. And it wasn't until I started to really spend most of my time telling the story of someone else's work that I really started to ask myself, why do we need this information and what does it do to people's mindset about coffee? What does it convey about coffee? So now we're going to get into the good stuff, marketing and ethics. One of the things that has become the most significant sticking point for me is the use of photography in our marketing. Now this is an amazing photograph. I hope that you can kind of see it. It's a beautiful photograph of a woman coffee producer, woman picker, and her young child strapped to her back. It's a photo taken in Ethiopia just a few weeks ago by one of my colleagues. It's a National Geographic kind of quality photograph. Now, we use images like this on our website all the time. We use images like this in our marketing all the time. What does this image tell you about the coffee? It's fresh picked. It's special. Why does it tell you it's special?
There's a story behind it with the photo.
What is the story behind it with the photo?
This woman is literally carrying her child as she's picking the cherries, and then that whole process until it gets to you, until you roast it, and then your customer drinks it.
Great. So the answer was that there's a story behind the photo because you see that this woman is actually picking coffee. She's doing her job so dedicatedly that she has her child strapped to her back. And then we can trace that coffee from these hands basically until the hands that produce it. But what about that implies to you that that coffee is high quality? What makes that special?
The effort.
The effort.
We put in to get that.
The effort that we put in to get this coffee because we have this photograph. Cool. Does this tell you anything about the flavor of the coffee? Can you see the coffee itself that she's picking? Do you know if she's picking red cherries in this photograph? She's taking a selfie. She's definitely not taking a selfie. This is not. Great. So one of the interesting things about this photograph, and this has come up several times on staff, and this is one of the things that I have started to do, is it's come up with, we should use that photo, it's a beautiful photo. We don't know these people's names. And I have said that we will not publish this unless we know their names and unless we've asked them for consent. Because my thought is, this little kid, I mean, I know he lives in rural Ethiopia, remote Ethiopia, but he's growing up in a time when he's going to experience access to technology at some point. And if one day he comes across a photo of his mother carrying him on his back, and it's used to sell somebody's coffee, I wonder what that child would feel like. I wonder what that would feel like for him in 10 or 15 years, because we all know we've all been tagged in that photo that we regret, and you try as you might, you cannot erase it from Facebook, if anyone still uses Facebook or anything like that. So that is one thing that I absolutely think about. I also think about just the idea that these people have no control over how their images are used. If we're using this image to sell coffee, what are we using it to convey? Are we using it to convey, like some people have answered before, that the folks who are growing this coffee and picking it need us to pay more money? Like, they obviously are working really hard. In this case, the woman has to bring her child with her in order to do her job. I should buy this coffee because it's helping someone else. And that's a message that's very subliminally communicated in this particular image, I personally think. And I want us to think about the photos that we allow to be taken of us and how we allow those photos to be used. If someone comes into your cafe, someone comes into your roastery, even if you're just pouring a really beautiful latte and someone stops to take a picture of it, I've seen baristas bristle at someone taking a photo of a latte that they didn't think was perfect, because they knew it was going to show up on someone's Instagram. Almost no one shows you the photo that they've taken, and almost no one tells you what they're going to use that photo for. It's the difference between the photo you post yourself and the photo you're tagged in. You never look as good in the photo you're tagged in. There's going to be photos of me from this event, and I'm going to look at them tomorrow and go, oh my God, I look like such a derp. I'm like wearing this ridiculous outfit with this ridiculous haircut, you know, and that's just me. You're not going to use this to sell anything. But if I'm a coffee farmer and you say, can I take your photo? Can I take your photo is very different from, can I take your photo and use it on my bag to sell your product? And that's what we often do. And that's no different from, can I also find out the name of your family? Can I also find out the history of your farm? Can I also find out the elevation, the exact geographic location of your farm so I can put a Google map on my website? Can I find out the name of your farm? But also I'm going to share all this information publicly with my consumers, with other roasters, with other importers, but don't sell to anybody else. Only sell to me, because now we have a relationship. Do you see where that kind of draws that distinction between the information we share about ourselves and the information we expect from producers? We are extracting information from producers in order to market their product. We are marketing their product for them without rewarding them for the value that them simply existing and creating that product has. So I went ahead and made a beanology for myself, because I thought a lot about the information that we share and the information that we're not comfortable sharing as the people who add the value to the coffee itself. Thank God you're really far away from this, but it has my exact address on it if you wanted to send me a postcard. Because when we do beanologies, we get down to the municipality, we get down as close as we can to an actual physical address, which is in some cases in remote Colombia or remote Guatemala. It's a municipality within a township or it's a town within a municipality within a village within a department. So you basically have my full address, my astrological sign, my birth date, my degree, a story about my experience in coffee, a couple of very unflattering photos that someone else took of me, including the one where I'm wearing that ridiculous fake Australian accent outfit. And then also, if you look really closely in this beanology, it also tells you how much I make an hour at Cafe Imports. It tells you how much I make an hour in USD, because I don't do conversions and we almost always print prices in USD when we're talking about price per pound. But what it doesn't tell you is what my cost of production is, what my other expenses are. And it does tell you a little bit about how I used that money last year, but it doesn't tell you anything about what it costs to live in Minneapolis where I live, or what my grocery bill is, what my car bill is, what my actual cost of production is, which means that you can look at this figure and make a snap judgment about whether or not that amount of money is fair based on your experience getting paid, right? And this is another really interesting thing as we get into the more nuanced aspects of traceability. More and more and more, we want to know transparently what every farmer is getting paid, and we want to share that information with our consumers. We want to share that information with our consumers because we want to convey a message to the consumer that we're paying a fair price for coffee without having any context about what that price means in the greater part of those people's lives. It also calls into question who owns that information. I have had a lot of clients and I have had a lot of friends in the coffee industry who publish FOB, they publish the cost of the coffee that they pay. Not one of them has ever asked the producer if it's okay to share that information. I've never experienced someone who says, is it okay if I print how much I pay on my bag or on my website? This is an important distinction. You can do absolutely anything, you can share any information about yourself you want, as long as you have consent to do it. If someone says, sure, fine, absolutely, share how much you make or how much you pay, that's a totally different story. But I will bet you that almost no one in this room would feel comfortable or would be allowed by their employers to share how much they make as their salary. We also are not paid based on our cost of production. When you go in to negotiate your salary with your HR department, you're not required to bring your receipts for how much you pay for rent, how much you pay for groceries, how much you pay for your lifestyle expenses, how much I've paid in hair product for my bad haircut. I don't have to present those things in order to establish what someone else thinks is a fair price. And we are constantly using the word fair to describe an amount of money above the cost of production that we have basically used in our marketing as a way of convincing other people that we're doing a good job. And I want to start thinking about not necessarily not doing the work. I think that what we need to do is continue to think about what is fair. But what does fair mean to us? Does fair mean taking the value from someone using their images, using their information, using their value, the value that they create outside of the actual product itself in order to make more money, but not compensate for them? Compensate them for our use of their images, our use of their information? I think every roaster in the world, and the conversation right now is going on far and wide, that says we need to pay producers more money for coffee, right? We need to pay producers, everyone needs to pay producers more money for coffee. What if we paid them money for coffee, but then also compensated them for using the value of their marketing? The marketing that they're not able to use for themselves because we take it as a cost of doing business. We use their photographs, we use their information. We use this information as a sign of exclusivity. We prevent them from doing business with other companies because we have a relationship with them that's depicted in photographs, that's depicted in information. Now, if I were to say, buy a coffee from a producer in Costa Rica, and I paid a certain price for it as an importing company, they sell to me, and I decide I'm gonna share that price on my material. What if that producer also sells to somebody else at a higher price? And what if that other person finds out that they're getting charged a higher price? Regardless of the context, maybe they're getting a better quality than I am, but all they see is that I'm paying less than they are. Then that buyer backs out. Now I've also prevented this producer from making money in a way that I would never allow myself to be put at risk, right? So it's interesting to think about, again, the ways that we use this information in our marketing, escaping what the producer has control over. Are we all still okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Send me a postcard. There's my address. You can actually find this on the Cafe Imports website. If anyone's ever bought coffee number 8879, I'm sorry that I've put my own information into that profile. It's like the greatest April Fool's joke of all time. So what if we started to actually add monetary value to the things that we take from producers that are intangible? We sell their coffee, we buy their coffee with this expectation that it's also going to have information that conveys a certain message to a consumer. What if we paid the producer for the message that we are giving the consumer, that we're taking from the producer at no cost? What if we actually started to ask producers for their consent? What if we said, not just, can I take your photo, but can I take your photo and use it to sell coffee? That also implies to me who gets to tell the story that a producer has, whose ownership is on that story. Now, the stories that I tell about the coffees that I buy, they're already 3 steps removed. They come to me from the producer who tells the exporter, who tells the green buyer, who tells me. That's how I do my job every day. From there, that goes to a roaster. Oftentimes it goes from a roaster to a barista. Then that goes from a barista to a customer. Would you allow the stories of your life to be told through that many chains and expect them to have any integrity on the other side? And if not, then why do we allow people to do that in coffee? Any image, any information that we post on our website at Cafe Imports, we tell people they can take it. They can take it and they can use it. That means that you could go on our website right now and you could buy a coffee from someone else entirely, download a photo from our website and use it in your marketing. If you were a savvy producer and you Googled your name and you sold to us one time in 2005, you would probably find information on our website that related to that coffee. And is that okay? When most of the time when you go to a roaster company's website, it doesn't tell you the names of the people who own the company. Oftentimes it doesn't have an About Us section. It doesn't have pictures of the people who work there. It doesn't have a story about who roasted your coffee and what their experience is and what their passion is and whether or not they're a third generation coffee roaster. It doesn't have that kind of information. Why are we sharing information about the raw product when we're the ones who make it drinkable? And how do we start to market coffees in ways that aren't exploitative of producers, reward them for what they're providing us in order to make their coffee marketable, but then also hold ourselves accountable for the information that we share about ourselves? These are questions I don't have answers for. That's the part of the knowledge talk where I'm like, well, and? That's where you all come in. But I do think that there is some question about what information do we actually need? And so this also comes down to, if I were reevaluating my job, and I have been reevaluating my job, because I don't know if I can keep offering people the kind of unbridled information I've offered them in the past. And I don't know if this means that we make a change as a company. I don't know if this means we make a change as an industry. I don't know if it means that one day I just decide that I can't share personal information about people anymore. But I will ask of all of the folks in the room who work with coffee and are passionate about coffee, what information do you need about a coffee in order to do your job? Do you need to know the variety? It's nice to know, but does it affect the way that you brew the coffee or roast it? Does the elevation of the farm affect the way that you roast the coffee so significantly that not knowing that information doesn't allow you to do your job? Does not having the story of the coffee affect you in doing your job so much that you can't buy or roast that coffee without knowing that information? And if that is the case, if these things are all things that you're like, no, you know what? I don't actually need that information in order to do my job, then we need to think of another way to do our job. I don't think that it means that we need to erase traceability entirely. I'm not trying to get myself fired by giving this talk because I've made myself obsolete. But I do think that it's time that as an industry, it's been 40, 50 years, let's start to think critically about what traceability means, because it's only going to get more competitive. It's only going to get more nuanced. We're only going to get more personal as we start to try and differentiate ourselves based on the raw product that we buy. So how can we move forward as an industry, supporting one another and supporting producers like we say we want to, by making it more about the entire chain and not simply about what the producer's done, that they have no control over the marketing? And that is my knowledge talk.
Definitely very thought-provoking, sitting down the front, and this is the second knowledge talk that I've heard. We were in Brisbane last night, which was really cool. You mix it up a little bit, which is good, so some little special bits in there for the Sydney crowd. I think what I liked about the talk was it gets us thinking as an industry about how we can be better. And thank you for everyone coming here today to do that, to learn and grow. I think that's outstanding. We're going to have a couple of questions, time for a few questions if anyone's got any.
Please disagree with me. Someone convince
Anyone
me.
disagree?
Yes.
Oh yes, there we go.
Well, I partly disagree because you need all that information because it deepens your love of coffee. It sort of gives you this kind of context and other significance. Like it's important to hear those stories.
The romance.
You might not
Yeah.
get the sort of personal stuff, but it's really important to know. For those of us who are on this end and want to be on that end, it's really important to know.
I absolutely agree with you. The idea of the romance of it, the idea of knowing where it comes from, is why we're here. It's what got me into this too. I mean, I am a journalist. The story of the coffee is what I'm in coffee for. But I also think that we need that in order to have the romance because it's what we've had before. It is the story that we've been told. I mean, if you look at the most common, the most popular movies in the world, the most popular romantic comedies all have basically the same plot. They all have basically the same thread. And they're popular and we're drawn to them because it's what we know we can expect. But there are lots of people in coffee who make the best coffees in the world, and their coffee doesn't have a romantic story behind it because it's just someone doing a job. And if you were to walk into, say, a bank downtown, and you were really passionate about finance for some reason, I don't know why, maybe you had a lot of it, that would be nice. But say you were really interested in financial workings, you were really interested in the way banks worked, and you went and you talked to a bank teller and you asked them to tell you a romantic story about the job that they do. I bet a lot of bank tellers would say, you know what, it's just a job. And I have a rich life outside of what I do. And when you talk to a lot of coffee producers, sure, they're really passionate about talking about their coffee because that's what we're paying them to talk about. That's what we're paying them to do for us. But really what they're passionate about is their family, is their religious community, is where they're from, is the way that farming helps them connect with the soil. Most coffee producers don't even drink coffee. And in that case, what is our relationship with that story about that farm? And why is it that the story is so necessary for us to have passion about a product that that person who grew it doesn't have the same passion about? They are passionate about their plants. They're not passionate necessarily about the actual coffee beverage. So what else can we use then in order to have that romance story? I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer for that question. But I do think that that's something that we absolutely should think about, is that why is that the part of the story that has romance? And what does that mean about the ways that we see producers and the disconnect between the finished product? It implies that we own that product, which implies to a certain extent that we own that producer's output. And a lot of times if you go into a coffee shop and you see a farm that you recognize on someone else's menu, you get hurt. You feel that personally. And that's because we have established that the information and that story and that narrative is ours now. We use that to market our product. And that, I think, is a really problematic thing that's built into the colonialism that coffee is. And that's systematic. That's like hundreds of years of not asking people's permission and of telling them that they should be proud because we've decided that their story is good enough for us to share on their bags. There are lots of producers whose stories are not good enough for us to share on their bags. And those people, their coffees go into blends. Do they not deserve that same degree of pride? Why is it that we pick and choose the people whose stories are romantic enough to sell coffee? And why is it that we don't pick and choose our story to sell that coffee? So I think that it's not necessarily, it's not something that has been born out of an ill intention. I think, again, we see someone light up when they see their photo on our websites or on our bags. But I don't think that as an industry we've ever thought about the deeper implications of what that relationship says about who owns what and who has the power in that dynamic. Doesn't mean we need to throw the whole thing away, but I think it means we have to shift our thinking about the power dynamic that exists in that type of marketing. And I mean, look, I'm absolutely guilty of it. I did 45 minutes of it today. I just put people's photos on the website because guess what? That's my job. It's still my job. I'm here having this conversation. It's still my job to share all this information. So I'm absolutely still in the thick of these problems too. That's why I'm here, is to workshop it with you, with a marketplace that I know is particularly savvy. Does that make sense? Does that sort of touch on a little bit of that question? It's that I don't think any of us are trying to do the wrong thing. I don't think anyone in the specialty coffee industry is actively, well, maybe like 2 people. No, not someone I have specifically in mind, by the way. That wasn't like ask me about those 2 people later. But like, very few people I think are intentionally exploiting the producer. I think that we all come into this with best intentions, but I think even best intentions sometimes have implications we haven't really considered, and they go back beyond our generation, even beyond specialty coffee, beyond Erna Knudsen, before any of this actually happened. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. So I mean, like as a barista, what we've been taught to do is to share the knowledge or share the story about the farmers or the producer to the consumer on everyday basis. And if 100%, like 100 people get spoken about a farmer, I believe it is beneficial for them. But then if there are 2 people in 100 people that are speaking about a farmer with a bad intention, then I think it's still a fairly good kind of like percentage, because same with like if you give the money to the homeless people, you rather give it to the wrong one. But if everyone start thinking like, oh, this guy is a fake homeless, or this guy is going to speak about the farmers in a bad intention, then everyone stop speaking. I think it's like that's not the solution. But we just need to draw a line somehow. But if you say like, oh, if you keep talking about the producer and it doesn't beneficial for them, then like I don't think anyone had to say to say that, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I'm not saying don't talk about producers at all. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I will say, however, that in this room of like 100 people, if there are 2 people who think that my talk was really crappy, I'm going to remember those 2 people. That changes my experience too. So it depends on the perspective. If you're the one being talked about, or if you're one of the people who's having a positive experience, is very different. If you're telling the story or if you're receiving it. And again, I don't think that traceability across the board is bad. I wouldn't do my job if I thought that that was true. I wouldn't even come and talk about it if I thought that was true. I would have just stepped away. What I think is that when we're asking for the information and when we're sharing it, if we think about everything that we're sharing and the ways that we communicate it and why, we will be better informed and we'll do more of that good. We'll share more of the good parts of the story of what we do. And we'll also do better work because we want to find those actual relationships that are partnerships, that are mutual, that are consensual, that are actually giving a different degree of value back to the producer. It is entirely true that when you meet someone, when you share time with them, when you actually get into their skin a little bit and into their lives, you want to spend more money on their product. You want to support them and be with them. And that's true of consumers, it's true of roasters, it's true of exporters, it's true of importers. But I think that there are ways to do that that are better and more responsible, and also don't just take and also give back. But I definitely think that, I'm not trying to say don't have any traceability on your bags. That's not, please don't fire me. It's not the point of what I'm saying, but I am thinking of how we do that. How we can do it better, and how we can do it with more value put back into the producers' pockets. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much, by the way, for sitting and listening to me get emotional about the work that I do, and for bringing you my unpopular opinions in specialty coffee. These are questions that I ask myself literally every day, and this is a conversation that I try and have very often, and don't always get a lot of engagement. Like, a lot of people just say, we need this. We need it. You're telling us that we can't do the business that we're doing. And that's not at all what I want to say. I really want this to be an open conversation. I really want you to disagree with me and tell me, no, I want you to show me ways that you are actually contributing to producers. I want someone to tell me that they don't feature photographs of people they don't know. I want someone to tell me that they've created a release form. I want us to workshop this together, because we are in this industry together. Competition aside, without all the people in this room, without all the people in specialty coffee, there is no specialty coffee. So we have to work together to a certain point. And I just really appreciate how open-minded everyone is, and the engaged comments that you're making and the questions that you're asking. Like, let's keep having this conversation as you think about it, as you go forth, as you make decisions about your businesses. Like, I want to know what you're doing, and I want to know what you care about and what you need, and I want to keep giving you what you need, as long as we can do it in a way that seems responsible and respectful. So I really appreciate all of you so much for coming out. Thank you so much.